Kirk's Starship Enterprise has a 12-year lost period, and Star Trek only hinted at what happened. Star Trek has only hinted at the events of Admiral James T. Kirk, William Shatner, and the crew of the USS Enterprise's lost years. In Star Trek's timeline, the 5-year mission of Captain Kirk and the Starship Enterprise seen in Star Trek, the original series, took place from 2265 to 2269. Star Trek, the motion picture, picked up in the 2270s, and the rest of the Star Trek, the original series movies, follow a relatively tight chronology from 2285 to 2293, when Kirk and his Enterprise crew permanently go their separate ways. Star Trek's 23rd century is well documented overall. Although the events of the first 4.5 decades of the 23rd century are largely unrecorded, between Star Trek Discovery Seasons 1 and 2, Star Trek Strange New World, Star Trek the original series, and the first 6 Star Trek movies, there is a clear picture from the mid-2250s to 2293. However, in the years between Star Trek the motion picture and Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, there are big question marks about what happened to Admiral Kirk and his USS Enterprise crew. What Star Trek revealed about Kirk's lost years? Admiral James T. Kirk and the Starship Enterprise share lost years that span about a dozen years between Star Trek the motion picture, which happened somewhere around 2273, and Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, in 2285. It's established canon that after the 5-year mission of Kirk's Enterprise in Star Trek, the original series, he was promoted to Rear Admiral and made Chief of Starfleet Operations. Kirk returned to captain the Enterprise in Star Trek the motion picture. It's possible Admiral Kirk commanded the Starship Enterprise on a second 5-year mission after Star Trek the motion picture. Star Trek Generations established that Kirk retired from Starfleet, moved to a mountain home in Idaho, and met a woman named Antonia. Kirk gave a peaceful life of horses and homesteading on Earth, the old college try, but the lure of outer space adventures was irresistible. At some point before Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, Kirk left Antonia and returned to Starfleet. Star Trek has only revealed tidbits about how Admiral Kirk's Starship Enterprise crew spent the lost years from the 2270s to 2285. Spock, Leonard Nimoy, returned to Starfleet after Star Trek the motion picture and was promoted to captain of the Enterprise. The Vulcan became an instructor at Starfleet Academy, and the USS Enterprise became an Academy training vessel under his command. Enterprise crew members Dr. Leonard McCoy, DeForest Kelley, Hikaru Sulu, George Takei, Scotty, James Doohan, and L.T. Uhura, Nichelle Nichols remained aboard. Meanwhile, Pavel Chekhov was promoted to commander and became first officer of the USS Reliant under Captain Clark Terrell, Paul Winfield. At some point, Sulu had a daughter named Adamora, Jacqueline Kim, who eventually became helmsman of the USS Enterprise B. Admiral Kirk last saw Adamora 12 years before Star Trek Generations prologue, set in 2293, which would be 2281. It's unlikely Star Trek movies and TV will further explore the events of Kirk and the Enterprise's lost years, but perhaps the fact that the Enterprise and his crew remained in action was what pulled Admiral Kirk back to space. The Star Trek franchise has enthralled audiences for decades with its complex characters, intricate plots, and sprawling timeline. Among the most iconic characters in the series is Captain James T. Kirk, commander of the USS Enterprise, NCC 1701. However, one of the most curious and underexplored elements of Kirk's history, and the history of the Enterprise, is the 12-year gap in the ship's timeline. While the Star Trek series and films provide some context about this enigmatic period, much of what occurred during those years remains shrouded in mystery. What little information, fans have been given hints at a wealth of untold stories that could rival some of the franchise's greatest adventures. The canon timeline of the Enterprise, the original USS Enterprise, NCC 1701, is a central figure in Star Trek lore, nearly as iconic as the characters who served aboard it. Built in the 2240s, the Constitution-class starship was launched in 2245 under the command of Captain Robert April. April's tenure aboard the ship was brief, lasting only a few years before he passed the torch to Captain Christopher Pike. Pike commanded the Enterprise for over a decade, with his adventures partially chronicled in the original series' pilot, The Cage, and later expanded in Star Trek Discovery and Star Trek Strange New Worlds. Pike's mission ended when the command was transferred to James T. Kirk in 2265, marking the beginning of the iconic 5-year mission explored in Star Trek, the original series. This period concluded in 2270, after which Kirk and the Enterprise entered a transitional phase. Following the events of the original series, Kirk's ship underwent a refit that prepared it for the events of Star Trek, the motion picture. However, between the ship's decommissioning after Kirk's 5-year mission and its reappearance in the first movie, there exists a 12-year gap that is mostly unexplored. This period represents a critical missing chapter in both Kirk's story and the ship's legacy. What we know about the missing years. The events immediately following Kirk's 5-year mission are briefly touched upon in the films and expanded universe novels. After completing his mission in 2270, Kirk was promoted to Rear Admiral and assigned to Starfleet Command, serving in a desk job that he famously loathed. Meanwhile, the Enterprise underwent a major refit to modernize the ship systems and adapt it to evolving Starfleet requirements. In Star Trek, the motion picture set in 2279, Kirk laments the years he spent away from the captain's chair, indicating that he was out of active Starship duty for much of this period. The film highlights how Kirk's longing for exploration and adventure made his administrative role deeply unsatisfying, leading to tension when he resumed command of the Enterprise for the VGR mission. What the films and series don't address is what happened to the Enterprise during the refit. While Kirk was adjusting to his new role on Earth, the Enterprise was still operational, albeit with a new crew. Canon provides no details about who captained the ship during this time or what missions it undertook. All we know is that by the time Kirk reclaimed command in the motion picture, the ship was fully refitted and ready for a new era of exploration. Possible adventures during the lost years. Although canon material leaves these years largely unexplored, Star Trek's expanded universe offers some tantalizing possibilities. Novels such as The Lost Years by J.M. Dillard explore what might have happened during this period, suggesting that the Enterprise continued to play a vital role in Starfleet's operations. However, since these works are not considered canon, they remain speculative at best. One theory is that the Enterprise served as a training vessel during its refit phase, testing new systems and preparing younger Starfleet officers for active duty. This theory is supported by the idea that Starfleet would have prioritized the Enterprise as a flagship vessel even during transitional periods. Another possibility is that the ship was used for classified missions, operating in the shadows of Federation space. These covert operations might have involved espionage, first contact scenarios, or even encounters with early threats like the Klingons or the Romulans. Moreover, the gap provides an opportunity to delve into the lives of other Starfleet officers who may have briefly taken command of the Enterprise. Characters such as Commodore Decker or even a young Captain Spock could have played pivotal roles during this period, offering fresh perspectives on the ship's history. Why the gap matters. The 12-year gap in the Enterprise's timeline represents an untapped well of storytelling potential for the Star Trek franchise. Filling in this period would not only enrich the character of James T. Kirk, but also offer a deeper understanding of Starfleet's evolution during a critical time in Federation history. From a narrative standpoint, exploring the gap could address lingering questions about Kirk's transition from captain to admiral and provide insights into how the Enterprise's refit shaped the ship's future missions. It could also shed light on the broader political and social dynamics of the Star Trek universe during this era, including the Federation's dealings with emerging threats and alliances. Hints from canon.